I'm pleased to announce Jerry Reid.
She had a bow repaired for me, and she's going to tell you all about me. I worked in aerospace for about 15 years, and I did a consultant thing after that. And I stumbled on some unique energies that I couldn't identify and explain. So I went on a quest to figure out what it was. So hi, I'm Jerry. What I'm going to speak on is what I stumbled onto from other guys that had made other machines in their time. And they couldn't identify some of the answers to some of the questions that arised from the phenomenons they saw happening with the movement of energies in their machines. So they went so far, but they couldn't answer things. So I looked at their machines later in the future, according to their time to mine. And knowledges had advanced a little bit, so I was like, now wait a minute, could this be possible? And ultimately, it led me back around in a big loop, and it led me back to technologies of Nikola Tesla. So I started really looking at modifying the SG Bedini wheel. And everybody focuses on the batteries, the electrolytic process of the electricity in that machine, and they have completely overlooked the quantum energies that are moving inside the inductors in that machine, the magnetic inertias, and this radiant spike energy that comes out of this machine. And it's very difficult to identify because we don't have scopes that will identify what this energy is. We can't meter it, so we can't prove it exists. So I had a theory on that. And that theory is when we take an inductor and we give it a certain amount of a potential volt, say 12 volts, and we create a magnetic field in this artificial coil system, we see a forming and collapsing magnetic field when we turn it on and off. So now we can adjust and control this magnetic field, this inertia. But my question was, in the blotch wall, when you create that field, you compress down a blotch wall. And then all of a sudden, when you shut that off, that blotch wall expands back out as it collapses, and then there's this spike voltage. Well, what causes that spike voltage in that induction? Why would there be more energy potential in an inductor when you shut it off than when you started? What causes that? What force creates this faster movement of electron to create a higher volt? So I tried to answer that question. So what I realized was, if I could write it down on a piece of paper, was that these fields are this inductor here. I'm going to write it out. I know it's going to be difficult to see, but we'll be able to see it on the video. Let's just say this is an inductor. You have an iron core or some type of ferrous core that's magnetically active. And you create this coil, and you've got two sides to it. You've got your north, and you've got your south pole. And when this is created, this magnetic field is compressed, this blotch wall changes. It literally moves on this Y travel and it compresses down. So that means something has to be displaced here. It has to force out for this to create this movement. Something has to be displaced. And mainstream science says that there's nothing there, but there has to be something there. We just can't identify it. So when this collapses and this field begins to open, the blotch wall begins to expand out as it travels. So instead of this being pushed out, now this begins to return back in and fill back in this area with some type of energy we can't identify because we don't have the scopes and the meters to even prove it exists, let alone know how much it is or what it is. But there has to be something moving back in there. We're not creating an absolute vacuum. There's got to be something. So as this finishes its collapse, you get this exponential increase of voltage potential. So my question was, what is causing that? There has to be some form of energy that's causing this increase in potential. There must be something creating that force. So even though I can't identify yet what this energy is, I can prove that there's something moving. There's a differential there. There's a pressure differential there. And because of that pressure differential, it creates this voltage spike. So you can convert 12 volts into 400 volts, and depending on the gauge of your wires and the length of your wires and the intensities there, you can spike this up to 100,000, 150,000 volts. But we're dealing with volt potential, we're not dealing with amperage. And that's important because there's not much amperage there, but there's the potential to move something that gets increased. And then when I understood that, I realized what was happening when this field collapsed. The momentary nanosecond spike that happens there also inverts the magnetic field. It completely inverts and changes its polarity. Why would it flip-flop? And when it does, what happens there? And what happens to this displacement when this inverts? Well, then all of a sudden, whatever force this is causing this has to be changing polarity as well. And then I realized what was actually happening in these inductors that nobody has realized yet. When this inversion happens and it does this flip-flop, it actually changes what comes out of the core of the ferro material. The magnetically active material also does this. And this is important because we took this coil and we added a spiring of a different gauge, size gauge, a smaller gauge to a larger gauge. And then we hooked it into a series. And we put a magnet coming in here that would come in on a tangent in rotation, so we gave it an angular motion. So the magnet was on a wheel, and the magnetic inertia would attract to the iron core, so that it would reach out ahead of its own space-time, and it would attract and move the wheel. Now we're taking that magnetic inertia and we're applying it to a gyrus and storing it in the wheel. So we're converting the magnetic inertia into mechanical energy in the wheel. So when this hits top dead center, it would trigger and create an induction in a small wire, and it would turn on and off a transistor. You could put it into the gate at about 0.7 volts, and it would turn the collector on. The collector is hooked to a battery at 12 volts, which causes the large wire in the inductor to create that magnetic field I was just talking about. So now we have a switch. We can turn that on and off, and we can time it to the rotation of a wheel. So now as we turn that off, we get this momentary spike, then we can shunt that spike off out into a battery. So we've just turned that 12 volts into the spike energy. My coils run at about 400 volts, but it's just pure potential. The pure potential is static, it's scalar, it's quantum level, higher frequency, and I dump it into an electrolytic process of a battery, 12-volt battery. And what I found was what happens is it excites the electrolyte in the lead acid, but it's not electricity yet because it's in a higher plasmatic state. So the electrolyte just kind of absorbs it. It gives it something to be in until it can slow down and condense and turn into an electron, and then it plates up on the plates. So I can dump 4, 5, 6, 700 volts into a 12-volt battery in a plasmatic state and just give it enough time, and it will condense and become electricity and charge that battery. The important thing here is that's John Bedini stuff. The important thing here was when I was talking about this inversion, when we do this, what comes out of the back of this here is a spiraling toroidal type of magnetic inertia. And with the Bedini wheel, you have 6 of these, and you get them doing this all at the same time, and it gets in resonance, and this goes back to Nikola Tesla, the resonant field that he was working with. this resonant energy. So when you get this all in time, and this inertia is coming out this magnetic field here, remember I told you the electricity inverts and it jumps in its volt spike. Well, guess what happens with this magnetic field? It's more than 10 times the magnet's field coming down here causing the trigger. So it literally amplifies the magnetic inertia. It literally takes this magnet from a 5 force into a 5,000 force coming out the back of that coil. And they've totally overlooked this magnetic inertia in the John Bedini wheel. So what he did was literally take the magnetic inertia they began with, and he was able to store it in a magnet in the gyrus of the wheel, so it turns it into a mechanical energy. That's why his wheel spins. Then he was able to take the circuit that he used and shunt this spike energy off into a battery, which was nearly 99% efficient. I mean, he could almost get it to run itself by that. But nobody has ever looked at this magnetic inertia increase here. So I took extrapolation coils and I designed some, and I put them on here to turn this magnetic energy into an electrical energy that I could put back into that source energy and put into that battery. So now we're nearly at 100% efficiency. It's very close. But that doesn't mean it's above unity. To be above unity, you need to be 3 times where you start at, because you have to have it, then you got to replace it, and you got to use it, and you have losses. So how could I get something to self-run? What could I do to make that happen? And then I realized what the importance was. So with this scenario, mainstream has missed Nikola Tesla's turbine technology and why it was so important. So I adapted Nikola Tesla's water turbine technology and I applied it to a magnetic field. So I create magnetic surface tension to store all this energy into a gyrus that we can PTO out on, drive whatever we want, and dump it and use it for our utility. So if we took these wheels and we set them up, I found that at least 5 is what we need. And we run a shaft all the way through, keep it all centered. You get all these wheels working like I just described. Now, all of that magnetic energy is being stored in this rotating axle. So I take the output of that energy that's in that first battery, okay, and this second battery from this wheel. This is your source for your switching here. Take and dump that, shunt that spike energy into this battery and charge this battery. Now take this battery and do the source for this wheel. And then you have your cascading series. And then this one sources this wheel and so on. So you're building up this stored magnetic energy in the gyrus. And that's the free energy John Bedini was talking about in his wheel. And you can turbine this however far you want, as long as you could put some type of stability in here for a main bearing to keep it from deviating because of centrifugal forces and imbalances and things, and just keep it straight. So you could create that journal much like a crankshaft in an internal combustion engine. So as long as you keep it stable, you could stack this as long as you want. And all you're doing is converting all of this into mechanical energy that you can extrapolate out with a PTO and drive whatever you want without fuel. By simply using this 5-force magnetic energy in these wheels and applying it in the wheel, you can convert it into mechanical energy that'll run itself, because it's increasing the magnetic inertia in that spike in an inversion process in the magnetic energies. It's actually amplifying that magnetic energy you started with 5. So that's where he got the more out than in. It wasn't the electricity. He got more magnetic inertia out of this wheel than he began with. And that is something that was extremely arguable with mainstream sciences, because we can't even identify what that differential is that we're displacing that creates all that spike. And I can't identify it myself. I wish I could, but I can't. But what I know is I can utilize that differential and I can store it like a rotating battery in these turbines. And then I can extrapolate that mechanical energy out of the axle, and I can put that into batteries without fuel, which means no toxicity, and it's very efficient. It's just trying to get mainstream science to accept these things. They don't like it because you can't meter that. And somebody can't put that dollar in their pocket because you're no longer buying that fuel. So they really, really suppress this because everything today is run under corporations, and if they don't get paid, they don't want it happening. So I've been beat up pretty hard with this concept, and I've had a lot of people follow me around to the point one of my big ones that I made, I actually took a backhoe and I separated it in 3 separate sections, and I wrapped it in sawdust, and I shrink wrapped it in a Faraday cage and buried it. Nobody will find it. But this works, and we don't have to have oil for energy because oil is not energy. Oil is a physical liquid. And what we do is chemically combust it to get the electrons out of it, to get the heat out of it, so that we can get this pressure differential that I'm talking about, and we don't need it. What we need is the pressure differential, and we can do it with magnetics. We don't have to do it with toxicity. Because whatever we put in, if it's toxic, what's going to come out is toxic. And there's no way to stop it. We can filter it, we can try to process it, but the end result is there's going to be something toxic. So let's start with something that's not toxic to us, magnetic inertia. And I believe that magnetic inertia is extremely important because all celestial objects broadcast it into our universe. Our sun broadcasts photons. It's an electromagnetic field. A very small part of that hits our planet. The rest of it goes out into space. And you can't see a photon unless it hits something, because it needs to create a frequency before your eyes can perceive it, and it does that in nanofrequencies between 320 nanofrequencies and 720. We see a rainbow when it refracts. So we know that energy is being broadcast out into the universe. So over here in Alpha Centauri, all those suns over there, they're doing the same thing, and it may be 4 million light years away, and another sun over here and another sun over here. So I believe that the universe is made up of a magnetic inertia, and it's an atmosphere that we don't perceive yet because we can't figure out what that energy is. And when you create a displacement in it or a motion in it, it creates low pressure, and gravity is a forcing force that forces and binds everything together because it forces to the low pressure, just like water seeking level. And once we figure out what that inertia is, then once we can control that, we would literally be able to have the energies of the universe in the palm of our hands. But so far, I don't know how to do it without the physical. I need all this big mechanical device and this switching escapement to create it to happen. But I can leverage the differentials, and I can utilize it. But I believe it's the 6th dimension of energy. It's consciousness itself. I think the universe is alive, and I think it's aware of itself. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about a little bit. And if anybody has any questions about what I just said, I'd be really, really happy to explain.
Jerry,
Yes, sir.
is part of the problem with what you're doing because it goes against the laws of physics? That's why you're having problems with getting it to fruition?
The biggest problem is when you pitch this to somebody and try to get it manufactured and get this out to production, is nobody wants to fund it. Because if they dump $1 million into producing this, they want a way to get their money back. And that it goes right back down to J.P. Morgan. J.P. Morgan, he defunded Nikola Tesla because Tesla wanted to broadcast free energy to people. But if you can't meter it, you can't charge for it. You can't charge for it, you can't recapture your money, you can't make money on it. And corporate entities, that's their sole reason for existence, is to make money. That's all they do. So if they can't make money, they don't want anything to do with it.
Well, I'm sorry I missed the very first part of your presentation. The previous diagram, we took some energy from the end and you brought it around back to the source, kind of like supercharging it. But it sounded like you were bringing it back just to try and get full 100% energy, or were you just trying to supercharge it up to 100% energy?
He asked if I was trying to supercharge the energy, and that's an interesting way of looking at it. Turbocharging electricity, and it's kind of a concept. That's kind of what it's doing, really. It's recycling the energy losses that other machines have, and it brings it around so that it can use it again. So yes, it's a very good analogy to say it's kind of a way of turbocharging electricity.
You also mentioned they're using a nearly 99% battery. Could you tell us what that was made out of?
Yeah, really, it's a common thing. Nikola Tesla, people aren't really aware of this, but Nikola Tesla was working with Henry Ford all the way back in 1900, and they had electric cars then. But Nikola Tesla could only make his batteries out of a German type of ash because it wouldn't permeate, it wouldn't leak. Okay. But the battery itself, I'll explain this a little bit. You have a battery, and what you have in that battery is these plates. Okay. This one connects to a rail on one side. This one connects to a rail on the opposite side. So you get your positive and your negative post. Excuse me, write that right. You get your negative post. So this rail is your positive post, and then the other rail is hooked to your negative post. And inside that, they suspend this in sulfuric acid, so you fill up your cells. Okay? And then through the electrolytic process of the transfer of the acids, using the electrons in the acids, it plates onto these opposite poled plates. So your positive energy, if that's what you're drawing off of, it will hold these electrons in this plate. It's called a sponging, and it'll hold that in there. Now these negative plates are empty. So when you connect a circuit between your positive and a wire through here, and it goes to your negative, when these electrons come off of this plate and go onto your positive through the electrolyte, and it goes up through here, this is a very general idea so we don't get overcomplicated. And what happens is they come over here and they fill up onto the negative plates. Okay? And now your battery's dead because you've transferred that energy. You've did that inversion that I'm talking about with my machine. You inverted the polarity. So now all the charge is on your negative side, and you want to draw it from this side. So now, for all intent and purpose, your circuit tells you the battery is dead. There's no usable energy there to run through what you're trying to run. So then you have to put your battery back on a charger. And what it does is that charge hits that, and it forces those electrons off of that negative side and pushes them back onto this positive side so that you can run the circuit you were running again. So it's a very slow escapement, just like a grandfather clock. Click, clock. So the gravity feeds that down, your clock goes click, clock. In a battery, what it's doing is flip-flopping just like that, but it's doing it very, very slow. But you have to recharge the battery so you can get it back. So we always have to reset the gravity. But with my machine, and what I realized what John Bedini did, is he found a way to create a series gravity hill. So he put he had a transistor here, okay? And he ran a series system into this wheel, into these magnets that was on a wheel. And then as these magnets attract to the iron core of the inductors, it created motion. So we had X travel. And as that moved, then it could hit this switch, and it would do its series switch back and forth. It would create that click clock. So that he's basically able to have that gravity feed doing this click clock back and forth, switching the battery's polarities back and forth, and moving the electrons in a different way. He was really beyond his time. And by doing that, he can store all that energy in this wheel rather than lose it into the atmosphere. or lose it in heat, or lose it in mechanical frictions and things like that. This machine that he made has no back EMF. That's why it was so efficient, because it had no electromotive force stopping the rotation of the mass. So as it attracts to it, it's putting energy into the wheel. And then when he would invert by the switch and invert that field, now he had north here, and this was north down here, okay? Then when he made and collapsed that field, it would invert and put the north up here and would push the magnet up here. So he would get a full 22.5-degree rotation of the wheel without any backward EMF causing the rotation of the wheel to stop. So that's the problem. That's the problem with the AC motor today, is the way that it's made. It builds up a back EMF and it fights itself, so you have to give it more amperage to fight the back EMF, and it's just a very efficient way of moving electricity. This is a much more efficient way of moving electricity because it doesn't fight itself. But the problem is we don't understand the energy in the inductors to really be able to harness the true potential of this machine. And I'd really love to see some of these very intelligent people that I met, especially like somebody like David Adair, if we could filibuster this concept around, maybe we'd come up with some idea of what this energy truly is, and if we can find a way to harness it so we can store it for our utility, because there's a massive amount of potential energy there. The machine itself, I believe that it could be self-running. Beyond unity, I don't believe there's a such thing as beyond unity. I think there's just energy, and the energy of the universe is. There's no beyond that. There is what is, and the energy of the universe is Yahuwah. So you can't get beyond that. But if we can understand the potential of what's happening in that spike, and figure out what that energy is that's causing that increase. There's a force there, and I don't know what to call it. I don't know what it is. I think Smarty would probably call it source energy, or conscious energy, or the energy of the great I am. But I know it's there. I just don't know how to hold it, to be able to use it for our physical, so we don't have to be buying all this gasoline all the time. So there's other things I wanted to talk about, but anyway, this was the essence of what I've been dabbling with this electronic series, Gravity Hill, so you never have to reset the gravity of the grandfather clock. That and one thing is one thing, but then I went into understanding, because somebody asked me a question, and it took me 3 decades to really fathom it in my mind. Why does a photon move? What is its propellant? Why does a photon continue to move when it comes out of that sun, and it has to move through that space, hit our atmosphere, which is going to restrict it, but it still moves forward until it gets to you, and we can feel it on our face? What mechanism makes that happen? Why wouldn't it stop when it hit the air? But it doesn't. It heats up our planet. Why? So with my understanding of the theories of what I'm about to present to you about my understanding of the theory of relativity, the photon does something very strange, and it's probably the only magnetic energy that we know of that does it. You have a photon. Let's call it a circle. Now, when it moves through space, we cannot identify any draft bubble behind it. There's no displacement. And it always set wrong with me when Einstein said nothing moves faster than light. And he calibrated his theory of relativity saying that constant squared is the speed of light. But we now know that the speed of light can be refracted. It changes when it moves through different magnetic fields, when it moves through different environments through space. We know it bends, we know it changes. So how can we take something and call it a constant when we know it's variable? It's an oxymoron. So if we start wrong, our middle's wrong, our end wrong, and we're at the fruit of the poisonous tree. We could never figure out relativity if we start with a variable. We'll never get there. So I tried to come up with a theory of it in my mind on how to explain it maybe a little bit better. And I'm not saying I'm correct because it's hypothetical, because there's no way to prove it, because I can't even identify what this quantum energy is. But I know it's there. So my theory is, if we have a magnetic inertia that is a pressure atmosphere in our universe, and gravity is a forcing force rather than a pulling force, it would explain why a photon moves. So I took 360, which is a circle, 360 degrees, and I multiplied it by 7. Okay, pretty simple math. Comes up 2520. Okay, it's a square number. It's finite. We know what that is. It's measured. We have the ruler. Boom. We know what that is. But then I did this. 360 divided by 7. You would think the equal and opposite to that would come up with a square, finite, scalable, measurable amount. But it doesn't. You get 51.42857. 142,857 repetitively forever. We've got a problem. I've been educated all my life that math was correct and everything had an equal and opposite reaction. But even our mathematics tell us that that's not a true statement. So I started looking at this repetitious number. And I decided, well, what if I did this? I put a 9 here. And then I started and did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Well, I'm not going to do this right. Didn't space it enough. We'll redo that because it's important. Because people want to know about this number that I have, that this pendulum that I made. Let's do it like this. 1, 2, 4, 5, 7, 8. Okay, that explains there's no negative, there's no zero, there's no absolute vacuum. And if the universe doesn't have a vacuum, if there's no place for zero to exist in a pressure atmosphere, so you can't have zero, so 9 can only be the highest number. And if we take 51, start at 51, and we start connecting vectors, say the 5, say this energy is the input of this energy that's coming in when we displace it, and we go to 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7. 5 is our in, our beginning. 7 is the end of our cycle, and it's the out. And if our sun is creating these photons, putting the energy in at the 5 until it gets strong enough, until it reaches its way out, now it's cycling with this energy that's coming out in front of it. And it's displacing the energy of the universe, this pressure atmosphere, removing resistance from in front of it, and it instantly fills in behind it and pushes that photon forward. And that's why the photon continues to move. You can't stop it until it hits something and it turns into heat or whatever. And that's why a photon will move millions and millions and millions of light years, because it's not being propelled by anything. It's removing its resistance from in front of it by broadcasting the light. And the darkness fills in behind it and moves it forward. So it can never ever stop. Because it gets out of the way what it needs to move out of the way so it can move. Nothing has to push it. Because nothing itself fills in behind it faster than it's moving. So nothing itself is what's propelling the photon. That's my belief. That's my take on it. And why I say that is because getting back to this constant squared, and I think anybody that's followed me has heard me say that Einstein was a quack. E equals mc squared. Okay. Energy is equal to mass. I could buy that because you have to have energy to make mass, and you have to have mass if you want to convert it to energy. So that seems pretty equal to me. But we have a problem here. This is a variable. We don't know exactly what constant squared is. And it may be a trillionth of a scale different in its calculation when it varies. But if you're going to move 100,000 light years, you're going to be thousands of light years off to your trajectory of where you want to get to. So you can't start with a variable. So what do you do about it? So I took this concept with the Bedini wheel and this turbining technology that I came up with, and I wrote it like this. Positive E equals mc squared is equally congruent to negative E equals mc squared. Now we have the yin and the yang. We have the complete balance. Now we have answers to what we never had before. Now we can answer why a photon moves. We can answer why the moon doesn't fall away from our planet, because it's not being pulled to it, it's being forced to it. The centrifugal force balances and it maintains in its orbital. So we have a balance of energy now. Now we can say the universe is balanced. Okay, so how do we want to move through space? We offset one way or another. So if we give it a -1 here, now we can move through space wherever we want to go, whenever we want to go, however we want to go, and we don't need energy to do it because we're removing resistance from in front of us. This fall pushes and this pushes it forward, and then we'll move like a photon. It's kind of like a warp ripple, that gravity hill I just talked about. And we're always constantly riding that wave. So we don't need the energy to move. The universe will give it to us. All we have to do is move what's in front of us out of the way. And we can ride the universe like a surfboard. So I propose that E equals mc squared is incorrect or incomplete. And we need to find a better way to find constants. And that comes down to that amulet that I had, which I meant to put on today, the 6-pointed star. And what we find is this 6-pointed star. Okay. It's a geometric design. When you hit certain types of quantum fields with 432 hertz frequencies, they begin to form ripples in the quantum realms, and it begins to shape. But before it turns to a physical, it creates this sacred design. And it seems like most of them end up being 6-pointed. And I can leave that for another expo if you'd like. But it's a very, very good point, because if you're going to move through space, you have to have a 0 point. You have to be able to know where you start from before you can figure out where you're going. Because if you don't know where you started, you can't get to where you're going. So the point is, the 0 point, which gets back to the Bedini wheel, is on an axle. So I'm trying to be quick because I've only got about a couple minutes left, and I'm trying to explain my redefinition of the theory of relativity, which answers a lot of questions that mainstream just doesn't answer. So there's my ideas.